Picture this, a foggy, rainy night in 1990. A big commercial jetliner just falls out of the sky and crashes into a hillside on Long Island. Now, you're probably thinking a bomb, right? Or maybe a hijacking, some kind of massive engine failure. Nope, none of that. This plane, it's just ran out of gas. So that's the big question, isn't it? The one that just hangs in the air. How does a modern airliner, just miles from its destination, literally run out of fuel? And the answer, well, it's not some single, simple mistake. It's more like a domino effect, a whole cascade of small, very human failures, some really tragic misunderstandings, and ultimately, a complete breakdown in communication. So let's just lay out the hard facts here. January 25th, 1990. Avianca Flight 052, a Boeing 707, is on its final approach to JFK, and it just drops from the sky. Out of 158 people on board, 73 of them, they don't make it. It's just devastating. So to really get our heads around how something like this could possibly happen, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. All right, so the flight from Medellin, Colombia, it actually took off with plenty of fuel, more than enough for the whole trip. No issues there. But as it got closer to the U.S. East Coast, it ran smack into a massive storm system. And that storm was just wreaking havoc on air traffic, forcing the plane into this long, long wait, just circling up there in the sky, burning fuel the whole time. And we're not talking about just one delay here. The plane was forced into not one, not two, but three separate holding patterns. Think about that. First, they're circling over Virginia. Then they get sent to circle over New Jersey. And finally, a third holding pattern just south of JFK. Every single time, they're just circling and waiting for clearance to land. And you can just imagine, with every single minute that ticks by, their fuel gauge is just dropping and dropping and dropping. So when you add it all up, they were held for 77 minutes. Let that sink in. 77 minutes of just flying in circles. That is a ton of unplanned flying, and it burned through all their buffer. All the extra fuel they had for, normal delays, for diverting to their backup airport, all of it, and then some. This one long wait, it basically set the stage for the entire tragedy that was about to unfold. Okay, so their fuel is getting critically low, but here's the thing. The plane itself, the technology, it was working perfectly fine. The real problem wasn't mechanical, it was human. It was all about the communication, or lack thereof, between the Spanish-speaking flight crew and the English-speaking air traffic controllers. And this is where a few simple words, or the wrong choice of words, ended up having the most devastating consequences imaginable. So here it is. This is the first time the crew tries to signal that things are getting serious. It's 8:44 p.m., and the first officer, Mauricio Klotz, gets on the radio and tells the controller they need priority. Now, in the cockpit, to the crew, this felt like a really clear signal. Hey, we're in trouble, we need to land now. But to the controller on the other end, that word meant something completely different. And this is where you can just see the massive disconnect happening in real time. The controller asks about their alternate airport, Boston. The crew comes back and says, we can't do it. We run out of fuel now. Pretty clear, right? But here's the crazy part. The controller later testified he didn't even hear that. He just missed it. So in his reality, he's just dealing with a plane that's kind of low on fuel, but it's routine, no big deal. In their reality, they're on the brink of disaster. So this is really the absolute heart of the problem, this linguistic trap they walked right into. The crew just kept saying priority. Look, maybe to them, based on their training or just their gut feeling, that word screamed, we are in deep trouble. But in the super standardized black and white world of air traffic control, priority just doesn't mean that. It's not enough. To get that immediate, lights and sirens, everybody stop what you're doing kind of response, you have to use the magic words, the official words. You have to say emergency. You have to say mayday. And the Avianca crew, they never said them. So the crew thinks they've gotten their point across. They think they have priority, and they get vectored in for a landing. But the nightmare isn't over. The weather is awful, and they get hit with severe wind shear, which makes the first landing attempt totally impossible. They have to do a go-around, basically pull up and circle back for another try. But that maneuver, it takes a ton of engine power they just didn't have anymore. Now, inside the cockpit, the captain, Laureano Caviedes, he finally says it. He says the word. After that failed landing, he turns to his first officer and says, tell them we are in an emergency. But then, when First Officer Klotz gets on the radio, he just says, we'll try once again, we're running out of fuel. So the magic word was finally spoken, but it stayed inside the cockpit. It never got to the people who desperately needed to hear it.
And this is it. This is the exact moment their fate was sealed. It's 9:32 p.m. The cockpit voice recorder picks up the flight engineer's voice, and it's absolutely chilling. He just says, flame out on engine number 4. And just a second later, another one goes. Just like that. The Boeing 707, this massive machine, it's turning into a glider.
I mean, if you want to understand the tragedy of this whole communication breakdown, just listen to this final transmission. 2 of their 4 engines are completely dead. They are literally falling out of the sky. And the first officer gets on the radio and still uses that same fatal, misunderstood word. He says, "We need priority, please." Priority. It's just unbelievable. A few minutes later, the plane was gone. So after the crash, the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, they come in. And it's their job to piece together this horrible puzzle and figure out exactly how this could have happened. And what their investigation found was that, this wasn't just a simple case of pilot error. It was so much more complicated than that. It was a whole chain of failures. Okay, so what was the official verdict? The NTSB's probable cause finding, it did place the primary responsibilities squarely on the flight crew. Their conclusion was that the pilots, 1, didn't manage their fuel load correctly, and 2, and this is the big one, they failed to communicate just how bad things were using that standard crystal clear language until it was just way, way too late. But listen, the blame didn't just stop with the pilots, not by a long shot. The NTSB report dug deeper, and what it found was a total systemic breakdown. It was like a perfect storm. They pointed to contributing factors from everybody. Air traffic control, for misunderstanding the situation. The FAA, for how badly they were managing traffic into JFK that night. Even the airline, Avianca, got cited for giving the crew bad weather info before they even left the ground. As awful as these aviation tragedies are, they almost always lead to painful but necessary lessons. And the loss of Flight 52, it really did lead to some fundamental changes in the entire industry. The big goal was to make absolutely sure that a simple misunderstanding over a single word could never, ever cause something like this to happen again. So what did they actually do? Well, the FAA and other international groups got together and created a much stricter, standardized glossary of terms for everybody to use. They introduced new phrases like minimum fuel, which is huge. It gives pilots a way to say, hey, we're not in an emergency yet, but if you delay us any further, we will be. It's a warning shot. And on top of that, there was a whole new emphasis on training for both pilots and controllers to be way more aware of language differences and cultural barriers. When you look back, the story of Avianca 052 is just such a powerful reminder, isn't it? That our most complex, most sophisticated systems, they're still run by human beings. And it really forces you to ask a tough question. In our world of incredible, amazing technology, how often is the weakest link, the thing that makes it all fall apart, something as simple and yet as incredibly complicated as one person just trying to talk to another?